Welcome to Breaking Barriers, where we're exploring African American history and today's social justice issues. Change starts with awareness, so listen and learn. I'm your host, Stephanie, and let's get started. Hello, and welcome back to Breaking Barriers. I'm Stephanie, your host. If you haven't been here before, welcome. If you're returning, so happy to see you. If this is your first time, I'll give you a little bit of breakdown of what we're going to be doing and kind of what this podcast looks like. So Breaking Barriers is a podcast about African American history and contemporary social justice issues, talking about how our history is continuing to repeat itself and what we can do to change that. So let's hop into today's topic. Alrighty, so today's topic is going to be redlining. If you don't know what that is, I'm going to explain it to you, give you a little history lesson here. So redlining refers to the discriminatory practice where services are being withheld from potential customers, specifically usually people of the Black and brown community, customers that are looking to reside in a specific neighborhood, but this neighborhood is classified as hazardous or risky. Typically, it's based, like I said, based on racial or ethnic composition. So rather than actual financial risk, these neighborhoods are considered to be hazardous or risky because of the people who are living in it. It's not based off of, where it's located or if there's anything dangerous in the area. It's solely based off of who is residing in that area. So this kind of started in the 1930s and continued on for quite some time. So let's kind of dive into that. So like I said, this started in about the 1930s. In 1933, the Homeowners Loans Incorporation established a task for refinancing home mortgages in default to prevent from foreclosures during the Great Depression. So this association, HOLC, created a color-coded map of risk levels in different neighborhoods. So essentially what they did was took a map, looked at who was living in different neighborhoods, and put red circles or lines around Black neighborhoods. If there was a red line around it, that deemed it to be high risk or hazardous, leading to the term redlining. So that's where redlining came from. If you want to look it up, you can look at a map and you will just see areas of just red lines everywhere. This are high risk areas, areas that we don't want people of certain class or certain economic status to be living in. So this kind of continued on. That's kind of where it started. And then we continue to see it even be enforced by the government. So as time goes on, about a year later, the Federal Housing Administration created policies that institutionalized redlining. So making it seem like it was an okay thing to do and it wasn't a problem. So now the federal government is now taking part in also redlining and making sure that Black people are kept in certain types of neighborhoods and kept out of others. The FHA insured mortgages, and they typically refused to give Black customers loans or back their loans or kind of help them get into owning property. So the FHA, their job is to insure mortgages, but typically in this time, they were refusing to back loans that were from Black individuals or loans that were going to be going into predominantly Black neighborhoods. They considered these neighborhoods to be risky or even just considered the individuals to be a risky investment for them. And that was that. That's what they left it at, and they made it seem like it was an okay thing to do and not a problem. This continues to go on and is actually adopted by other private banks, other insurers, and it kind of just further enforced that segregation of the Black community and the disinvestment in the Black community. So as, Black individuals, Black families are going to these banks and going to the federal government, saying, hey, I'm just trying to get a loan so that I can get a house, and being denied, just caused kind of more issues. So those denial of mortgages led to the resulting of lower home ownership rates in the Black community. This also caused other issues such as social consequences, where they're stuck in concentrated poverty. The lack of investment within their neighborhoods and their communities led to economic decline in those redlined areas, just leaving poverty just to continue to grow and grow and grow because no one was ever investing into these communities. It also led to educational disparities for the people living in those areas because the lack of property taxes in that area led to less money being funded into these schools. So the black students are going to their schools, have less funding. So they're getting a lower grade education than people of different communities because people in predominantly white communities have a large property tax and those taxes are going into their schools. They're getting money to get put into their schools, to get new books, to get new, equipment in the school, to have better teachers, to do all of these things that are needed for a better education. And the black communities were continuing to lack in those areas because of the lack of home ownership. This also created a bigger gap in wealth among different communities. When, there's a bunch of white people buying properties and they're being able to grow their wealth and help themselves and help their generations to come, and the black communities aren't, that creates a really big gap in between those communities. Home ownership is the primary means of accumulating wealth in the United States. It has been, and it probably always will be. Owning a home is very important, and it's a very big step in a lot of people's lives. It helps you to create generational wealth for yourself and your family and everyone to come. So denying black individuals and black families to access mortgages and home equity just contributes to a significantly big gap between different communities. And it's kind of just continuing to happen to this day, and it's kind of pushing us back in a way rather than forward. So at this time, there was a lot of activists and organizations such as the NAACP that were working to push back on redlining and other discriminatory practices. And eventually, it did lead to greater awareness and educating people and making them realize what's going on is wrong. And it did lead to legislative change. In 1968, we got the Fair Housing Act of 1968. Which was a landmark legislation aimed to eliminate discriminatory practices in housing. Unfortunately, while redlining and other discriminatory practices in housing was banned, it was very weakly enforced. We didn't see a lot of, enforcement behind this Fair Housing Act at the time, and these discriminatory practices continued on and on and on. In 1977, we got the Community Reinvestment Act, which required banks to meet all credit needs for all communities that they serve, including low-income and moderate-income communities. This is a big step towards addressing redlining and discriminatory practices, but there still remain certain challenges that, they weren't truly enforcing it as much as they needed to. So we're still kind of facing the same issue that we saw with the Fair Housing Act, but it was another step that kind of got us closer to where we needed to be. Although we saw those acts come in and play their role, they didn't do enough, and we are still seeing evidence of redlining. So like the effects that we saw of redlining continue to this day. Black communities are still continuing to face economic challenges through underinvestment in their communities and the reduction of access to quality housing and education. So now I kind of want to jump forward and talk about something that we're seeing today, the kind of reformatted redlining and kind of change and shift and see how they connect. So nowadays, you're going to see a lot of gentrification. Again, if you haven't heard of that, I'm going to tell you. So gentrification, in simple terms, is the transformation of urban neighborhoods through increased investment and rising property values and the influx of higher income residents, which often leads to the displacement of lower income residents. So someone who's been living there a long time, maybe, they're renting there, they've been a long-term resident there, but now they're being forced out. So essentially it could be a commercial business or an individual investor that is buying a plot of property, or they're taking over the current complex that is there. They're investing their money into it for it to be upgraded, so it has better appliances, it make it safer, make it look nicer, and it's upgraded to the point where the value of that housing goes up because it has new appliances, it's renovated, and it just looks a lot nicer. It's safer. It's more comfortable for the people that were living there. But now the price has gone up, and the people who were living there can no longer afford to live there. People who may have been living there for years and years and years, they maybe had their entire family living there, and they have lived their whole life there, now cannot afford to live there anymore because of gentrification. Now they have new clientele, new residents coming in to pay the higher price because they can, because it looks very nice, it's brand new, it's beautiful, but now you have a bunch of displaced residents. So the reason all this is happening is that these real estate developers and investors are getting a tax break. They are kind of encouraged by the government to make these investments. If you invest this amount of money into this property for this amount of years, then you can get this tax break. So it gives them an option. Okay, you know what? I can put my money to good use here, get a tax break, and make some money off of it. But, it has its good qualities, where this place is being renovated. It's safer, it's more comfortable, it's beautiful, but you have a lot of disadvantages where you're displacing current residents and, destroying the culture and the memories that they had in that space, and now they don't have anywhere to go because they can no longer afford to live where they have been living for years and years and years. Gentrification can also entirely shift the demographic of that neighborhood. You're putting in a brand new, renovated, new development in a area that is considered an urban area that doesn't have, the nicest, most expensive stores in it. It has, mom and pop shops and, local shops that people can go to and get what they need. Now that you're putting a new development in, you're getting entire new group of residents living in this building or living in this complex of houses that are in a completely different economic status. And all of those mom and pop shops and small shops are going to be run out. It's going to lead to, retail stores that, are on the higher end and complexes of like shopping malls and stuff like that, bigger chain restaurants, and kind of change the entire social and cultural fabric that neighborhood was known for. Although it's nice to have, new developments and to upgrade things and to renovate things, that's great, but you're now running residents that have been there for years out. You're running out like local businesses, small businesses who were doing just fine in the neighborhood and had great business, but now their business is being bought out. They don't have the space to go there anymore because the people that are in that neighborhood aren't really going to shop at their local spots. They're going to go to where they usually go because they are in a different tax bracket. They have a lot more money. They're not going to bother going to these small little shops. They know what they usually get, so they're going to keep going to those places, even if it's further outside their community. So not only are you losing residents, you're losing businesses. People are going out of their jobs, and even now there's going to be more money put into those schools, and the students or the children of those families that have now just moved in there are now going to be going to those schools, and it's going to be a very, very different dynamic. The kids that were living there previously, living in that neighborhood previously and going to that school, are now going to have to go to a different school because they can't afford to live in that neighborhood anymore. Although redlining and gentrification are not the same thing, you can see the effects of redlining and gentrification. So when you're seeing, these people being displaced because they're renters, is because they don't have that generational wealth from their ancestors buying a house. Their ancestors were never able to buy a house, because they are Black and they were discriminated against in redlining and other discriminatory practices. So they don't have a house that they could rely on to, sell or keep and have family come in. They were renting just as most of us are now. So that's kind of where you see that pattern come in, and it kind of flows through what we're seeing now. Because a lot of Black families are renters and living in low income areas because of our history and kind of how we were always segregated and not able to contribute into our communities and invest into our communities the same way that white communities are able to. A very large impact of gentrification, aside from the displacement of residents, is the loss of cultural heritage. These are likely people who have been in this neighborhood for a very long time. They probably know all of their neighbors, and they know all the people that work at the local stores in their area because this is their community. Now they're all being taken out, and it kind of loses that culture and those characteristics that it's had because now it's being commercialized. And people are losing their connections that they have to their neighbors, the people they consider their friends and even family. You're also going to see possible community landmarks and historical sites that are being repurposed and destroyed and not being protected as they should be. Although we see this new property coming in, that's great for the people who own the building, that's great, or people who own their house in their complex, that's great. But for the people who are renting, that completely just destroys everything that they have. Now they don't have an option to go back to where they were expecting to be able to go back to. Now they have to figure out, what are they going to do now? And it also creates new jobs in the area, of course, because, there's probably going to be new businesses. But that doesn't necessarily even help those people because if that's not a job that they have a skill set for, then they're, again, just being run out of their own neighborhood. And now new people are coming in, and that gives other people jobs, but not the people who have, dedicated so much of their time to that neighborhood that they've lived there for decades. They're all just being run out of their neighborhoods, their home, the place that they've known for years and years and years. So these wealthier residents that are coming in and living in these complexes or living in these apartments or these houses, whatever it is, they're coming in and they're now going to take over and be the majority in that neighborhood, which can alter the voting patterns in that neighborhood. Maybe the neighborhood was going one way and was, trying to push towards making change for the Black community in that community. But now you have less Black people in that community and more white people coming in and making changes. So now Black people are, again, being underrepresented. The things that they need are not going to be covered and not going to be taken care of because the whole neighborhood is now marginalized as new. These new wealthier residents are coming in and they're able to invest in their community in the ways that they want, which may not necessarily be what the Black community needs. And it changes local policies and development decisions. There are ways to continue to mitigate these negative effects that gentrification has had on the communities. So one of them to start with is affordable housing initiatives. So you could talk about rent control, inclusionary zoning, and affordable house trust. So rent control is probably the best option where you have an apartment complex where you can only make a certain amount of money to live in that apartment. So say, it's just you. You're looking for a one-bedroom apartment, one person. The max money that you can make monthly is X amount. If you make over that, then, you wouldn't be able to live in that apartment. Although, that doesn't seem fair to other people, it helps to keep those long-term residents in that neighborhood because if they aren't making, a bunch of money, then this is a chance for them to be able to stay in their neighborhood that they know, stay in their community, in their environment, especially, if they have kids or they've lived here for a very long time. Because if you have kids and, now your whole life is being disrupted because you're being moved out of your neighborhood, now your kids have to go to a new school and, they're being disrupted from their education. And now they have to make a whole new group of friends and they have to learn to live in a new space. And that's very disruptive for a child and can be very difficult for them to understand. So rent control is a very helpful option to keep families in the neighborhoods that they know with their friends, families, and staying in a spot that they are familiar and comfortable with, because even if they, are displaced, it's really hard to find a new place to go that you feel comfortable around all the people that you live by. Of course, you're never going to find a place that's perfect, but, knowing that there are other people that in the area is very helpful, especially as a Black person. It makes you feel a lot more comfortable, is safe, and know that you're welcome there. Another factor that's really helpful is community engagement and inclusion. So making sure that the people that live in this community, who have been in this community before, these investors came in and started making changes to their community, are involved in the decisions being made in their neighborhood. Having their voice be heard is very important. Yes, decisions are going to be made either way, and decisions are going to be put through, when the money comes around and when the decision is made. But having people who live in that neighborhood know that neighborhood better than anybody else is really important. They know that neighborhood. They know what it's gone through, what it's seen, what's happened. They know the ins and outs of that neighborhood better than anybody else. So having them included in that is helpful, because then they're able to see, okay, this is what we really need. This is what we don't need. And here's how we can do it. Here's some suggestions. Even if their suggestions aren't taken, it should be taken into consideration, just to be like, hey, okay, you know what? They do live in this neighborhood. Their input is important. They know the ins and outs. They know everybody in this neighborhood. They know what it needs the most. These investors that are coming in to make changes in these neighborhoods need to be educated and trained. Like when you go to a new job, you do have the skill set for whatever that job is because you got hired, but you don't know how that company works. You don't know how they function and how everything is done the exact way that they do it. So when this investor comes in, they need to be taught about the ins and outs and what's going on in this neighborhood, what it needs, what it's had before, what they've already tried, what didn't work, what did work. If you can, further develop on what the things that did work, then you can go from there. But they need to be educated, because the people that are living in this neighborhood are the experts of that neighborhood. As we talked about earlier, there's probably a lot of small businesses in these neighborhoods, and now they're going to see an influx of new businesses. So a way to help keep those long-term residents in that community would be to making sure that we are hiring those people, like hiring locally. So whether it's a small business that's been there for a long time or a new business, training the people that live in this community to allow them to stay in their community, training them what they need to know for this specific business or whatever it is. If it's a grocery store or a restaurant, training them on those skills and making sure that we are doing our best to hire locally before we hire externally. We are hiring new people to the neighborhood, just kind of keeping that money flow within that neighborhood and ensuring that people aren't being removed because they can't afford to be there anymore. Lastly, the preservation of cultural heritage in that area should be maintained. Although, you're putting in some new developments and there's new businesses coming in, to maintain the history and the culture in that area. Because even though it may not be the same people there anymore, it's still the same history that occurred in that community. So taking that away completely changes the community and destroys that history. I think that there's a way to renovate and create new developments without running out the people who live in that neighborhood. If we could maintain those residents that have been living there for long term and just let them know, hey, this is the amount of time that it's going to take to renovate, but we're ensuring that you are going to still be able to live here, to make it a safer area for people to live in, make it more comfortable, and give them the experience of having, a renovated space, whether it's a house or apartment or a condo, whatever it is, to give them the chance to have that and stay in their neighborhood that they've known for a long time is key. And I think that if we could do that, then we'd have a lot less problems. It's nice to have these new things, and everyone deserves a chance to have these new things. Whether you're black, brown, whatever color, it doesn't really matter. You should be able to have access to a safe, comfortable housing. Having safe and comfortable housing is a psychological need of all human beings. We all need this. This is something that we need on a daily basis. We need food, water, shelter, clothing, sleep, protection, all of those things. So those things are our first need, first and foremost. in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the first thing that you're going to see at the bottom of the pyramid is psychological needs. Housing is in that. Although, we may not all live in the perfect housing, but if we are rebuilding this housing because we don't think that it's safe or we don't think that it's livable, then why would we not just continue to give that housing back to who was there before? I understand that, it's renovated and, they could sell it at a higher market price, which is fine. I get that. But if you could, put rent control on it and just, raise the rent, but keep it at a maintainable spot where people who were living there before can still live there, then we wouldn't have a problem. If we want to be able to make change in the Black community and have generational wealth for ourselves and our family and everyone to come, then we need to be able to make some change. And this is a step that we can make that change towards. Start speaking to your local representatives and writing to these people or calling them or emailing them, whatever you have to do, and just being engaged and just going to your local town meetings and being a part of that. Even if you don't say anything, just listen and see what's going on and continue to go and eventually get to the point where you can give your opinion, because this is your local area that you live in. You have an input, you have something to say. You've seen things that need changes to be made. Say something, speak up. Even if you're too afraid to say it yourself, write that down and submit it somewhere. These changes can be made, and they should be made, because we deserve better in the Black community. And we could have more. We just need to work towards it. Continue to do your research on these things of, redlining and gentrification and other discriminatory practices when it comes to housing, because, like I said earlier, having, home ownership is the easiest way to create that generational wealth for yourself and your family. As always, thank you for listening. If you like this podcast, definitely go watch the other ones and continue to see what we have coming forward in Breaking Barriers. Thank you so much for listening. Please subscribe and have a good day. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next episode.